So we're going to begin, and I want to welcome Canon Lucinda again. Grace and peace be with you, and we will be surrounding you with prayer as you answer these questions. So question number 1. Please tell us about your personal prayer life. Do you think it is important for the bishop to encourage and support both clergy and laity to cultivate their prayer lives? If so, how would you do that?
Is this on?
Yes,
it is on. Yeah, okay. Just wanted to make sure. My personal prayer life, I would have to say, is something that has developed over time. And I have tried different types of prayer at different times. But currently, what I do is every morning I get up 2 hours before I have to be anywhere. And I grab my cup of coffee because it's on a timer, and I go sit in my chair in the front room. And my chair looks out at my garden and at the Boise Mountains. So I read the morning looking at the mountains and the weather that has come in overnight. And I have a chance to look at that. So it kind of sets the stage and the environment for me. And I'm a slow person to wake up until that coffee kicks in. But once it does, on my phone, I pull up the scriptures from Forward Movement. So I have it right on my phone. It says Daily Office. And I spend my time reading the scriptures and engaging in Lectio, a formal Lectio Divina. It just helps me to connect with scriptures, and I see things that I've never seen before, and I think about things that I've never thought about before. And so it's a discipline that I have every day, but it's not hard to do. And it's something I look forward to, and it sets the stage for the rest of my day. So it's really important for me to have that time, to have that moment, those moments. And my husband wonderfully goes out to watch the soccer games that he's recorded beforehand, but he's great about it because he has it on mute, so it's all Bluetooth connected, which is wonderful for me. So that respect helps too. Of course, the bishop should always support her clergy and lay people in developing prayer life. One of the things that I think is really important is understanding that different types of prayer speak to different personalities and different ways of living life. And so what may work for one person may not work for another. But the idea is not only as bishop to model one's prayer life, but also to encourage opportunities for people to explore their own. How many of you have gone to a prayer retreat? How many of you have done it? So probably some of you know of all the different possible practices that are available to us that can speak to us not only in terms of where we are now, but at different times in our lives. It also helps us with other people that we're working with. So obviously and honestly, prayer life is like the basis of how we relate to each other and to God. Gives us that wonderful time. Thank you.
Thank you. Our current policy in the diocese is full inclusion of our LGBT members, including ordination and clergy officiating at same-gender marriages, if they wish to do so. What is your position on these issues, and what would your directives to the diocese be on this issue?
You know, coming from the Diocese of Idaho, as I do currently, I have learned in my 8 years there that there are some things that I took for granted living in California that were actually demanded more commitment and were harder to acquire. So in the Diocese of Idaho, we had to get very clear around where we were with same-sex marriage and how we as stand forth and be supportive and be brave where we were. I really hope that does not go backwards here in the Diocese of El Camino Real. I believe in full inclusion. I believe that God created each of us the way that we are, with all the gifts that we have as human beings. And those gifts lend themselves to lay ministry. They lend themselves to different parts of ordained ministry. And I believe that people have absolutely the right to marry who they choose, and they should be able to live together in a lifelong committed relationship, because that's how we grow as human beings. God intended for us to be in relationship with each other. I know that not everyone feels that way, and I know that sometimes there are congregations where people aren't quite on that same page. Sometimes there are places where a clergy person, for very good reasons of their own, is not ready or prepared to perform same-sex marriages. That's fine, because none of us have to perform a wedding if we don't want to, right? As clergy, we know that. So I think pastorally, it's important to respect a clergy person's position on that, and be able to provide for a couple to have the same-sex wedding where they would like to have that. I think that's all very important. So, my directive would always be to err on the side of generosity, to be pastoral, to be inclusive, to stretch ourselves if we're a little bit uncomfortable, and to make sure that we all have the same information before we start taking positions, which is something I'm really aware of where I am. So that's where I am on that issue, and I do feel passionately about it because it's not always been easy in the place where I currently serve.
Question number 3. The last General Convention encouraged the trial use of alternate liturgies. Our diocese has tended to stick with liturgies from the Book of Common Prayer and Enriching our worship, with a few alternative additions for certain seasons. What is your opinion on the use of alternate liturgies within a diocese? Do you see liturgical renewal as important in the life of our diocese? And what would your directions be with regard to alternatives?
I think it is really important for us to remember that liturgy is the work of the people. And the work of the people means that liturgy has to be able to adapt as time goes on. Certainly the language of my grandmother is not my language when it comes to liturgy. And when my daughter looks at our 79 Book of Common Prayer and hears that language, to her ear, it sounds archaic. So being honest about that, I think, is really important. Also, anybody who works in a multicultural environment, in a multilingual environment, knows that in order to make that happen, that we have to be able to adapt liturgically so that we can all worship together. I love the Book of Common Prayer. It is an amazing resource for us. I love Enriching Our Worship, EOW, because it has some wonderful alternatives. And when the General Convention said, which is really the point, we're not going to simply revise the entire Book of Common Prayer. They said we're going to memorialize the 1979 prayer book. And then we're going to add in supplemental liturgies. In order for that to happen, it means that we need to be open to additional liturgies, to alternatives. Now, I'll grant you, some alternatives are really, really amazing, because liturgy is an art form and they're beautifully done. And some are really awful. As bishop, of course, I am the chief liturgical officer of the diocese. That's just the responsibility. But I really love when someone comes at me with a new Eucharistic prayer or a different setting to something and says, what do you think? My first question is, why? Because there's usually a really good reason why somebody wants to try something different, right? But I want to hear that. And I want to say, have you done your research on it? For example, does that Eucharistic prayer you want to try out? Does it have an anamnesis and epiclesis? And they say, what's that? Then I know we need to make sure we understand that. My point is that we've got to be open, especially in such an incredibly varied environment, that it's important to have the ongoing conversation, to respect each other, and to hear the whys, and give it a whirl if it makes sense to do so.
Thank you. Oh, just take a deep breath. It's hard to be up there, I think. Question number 4. How would you support, empower, and care for ECR's vocational deacons and their varied ministries?
I have been so fortunate to be able to work alongside some amazingly gifted, talented, committed vocational deacons. The first time I worked alongside one, he was wonderful because we spent our time arguing about our different calls and what that meant. Because I was an assistant rector at that time and he was a newly ordained vocational deacon. And that discussion was incredibly fruitful because he taught me so much. So that when I became a rector and the bishop gifted me and our parish with this amazing vocational deacon, then I knew that I had a partner in ministry. And that partnership meant that we had mutual respect and mutual accountability. And her job was to push on the institution. And my job was to provide the resources that she needed so that she could make sure that we were turned outward to the church outside the walls. And I loved it because we fed the hungry, clothed, and they could visit the sick and imprisoned. And we were all busy doing it because we had the most amazing partnership. So when it comes to vocational deacons, I have a deep love and a deep respect, and I understand, even though I'm not a deacon, that the calling to the diaconate is one that is unique to every single deacon. And as such, we need to understand that the diaconate is not subservient to the priesthood. It is a parallel calling. And it is something that needs to be supported and encouraged. There needs to be deacon time with the bishop. And we need to understand that it's not just a catch-all because somebody doesn't want to do something, right? The deacon is so important to our ministries. It's so important to the mission of the church. The deacon is probably, for me, the most valued person often in the parish. Though sometimes beside the treasurer, but the treasurer doesn't. But I just can't emphasize enough how important the diaconate is, and really, I would love to make sure that we had at least one deacon in every single church in the diocese, because that's what we really need in our churches.
It's question number 5. Take a drink. Good time. All right. What do you believe have been your major accomplishments in life and in leadership in the church? What skills and abilities have most helped you in these accomplishments?
Talking about accomplishments in life and accomplishments in leadership is something that is probably not the healthiest thing for me to talk about, because I am a high achiever. I'm that person. I'm that person who checks off the boxes. I'm the person who strives, who continually strives to get there, to reach high. So I want to talk about what has really, really helped me as a leader in the church, and as a person, and as a faithful person. 10 years ago, I did the Camino de Santiago in northern Spain, the 500-mile walk across northern Spain. And because I am driven and purposeful, or at least I was more at that time, I made sure that I walked it the whole way, every single step. There was no way I wasn't doing that. And while I was walking, the first couple of weeks, I was thinking about how I could tell the story of the Camino and the story of a faithful person. And then after 2 weeks of walking, my mind suddenly cleared. And I enjoyed simply walking every step of the way, knowing that every step mattered, that everyone I met along the way mattered. And I enjoyed just living in the moment and praising God for God's beautiful creation and seeing this wonderful, wonderful planet, and for having the privilege to be able to walk on that. And I got to, my husband was on bicycle, and I got to the top of Monte de Oso, which overlooks Santiago. So I was on the last part, the last 10 kilometers. And I stood there at the top looking over Santiago, and I said to my husband, I don't have to go there. And of course he said, what? You did all that? Right. I didn't have to go there because that wasn't the point. What I learned, and this is the skill, this is the accomplishment, what I learned was that it was the journey of it that mattered. The way that I had learned to become aware of being God's beloved and God's creation. And I realized that every single person around me was a pilgrim in their own way. And that we were together on this walk. And that was what I was called to do, was to be a pilgrim leader. That's what I learned.
And last but not least, what are your thoughts about the Episcopal Church as the Episcopal branch of the Jesus movement? How have you embraced this new understanding of evangelism? Are you familiar with the Reclaiming Jesus statement, and do you think it has a place in our diocese?
I love the foresight of the presiding bishop in saying that we are the Episcopal branch movement is this huge web of people of different walks, of different denominations, of different theologies. And of course, within the Episcopal Church, we have all that too. But the point is that we have our place within the Jesus movement. And our place, as the presiding bishop likes to remind us so often and so succinctly, is the way of love. I think one of the best things we have going for us is the simple statement that if it's not about love, it's not about God. And the fact that that is a simple message that is being broadcast all over the world. He has given us the simple language that we needed. And we don't always have to use words, but when we do, love is a 4-letter word that's pretty good. Wasn't there a song? Love is just a 4-letter word. It's just, it's so simple, it's so easy. I don't think it's a new understanding of evangelism. I think it's the oldest understanding of evangelism that we have, right? When the Jesus movement was happening in first century Palestine, and Jesus is walking around with his followers, he's talking about the way of love. He's pushing against what he sees happening in society, and he's saying, people, it is about love. He points to God, he points to the neighbor. It's pretty simple. I think the Reclaiming Jesus statement came out over a year ago, as I recall. And I think the thing about that, it was a statement that proved to be a bit controversial at the time. But what I think about it is that the point was that we need to embrace who we are and how we see Jesus and how we see God as loving and how we walk that path. That's what this is about. And for me, and I hope for you, it's a pretty easy path to walk together, this way of love.
Thank you. Allison, how are we doing on time?
We can take one question.
All right.
Oh, here we go, right? Fun.
All right, does anybody have a question?
Yes, Carol.
Can we talk about the public square?
Please.
And you know, what do you see the role of the church?
You know, that's a great, thank you for asking that question. I want to talk about the public square. One of the challenges that I think you face in the Diocese of El Camino Real is the fact that you're not that close to the capital, right? Now, both dioceses that I came from, both the Diocese of Idaho and the Diocese of Northern California, it was actually pretty easy for me. So when I wanted to carry my banners, when I want to march for our lives and work on the environment and care of creation and immigration and all those things, there's always a whole group of Episcopalians down at the Capitol. And it's simple for us, and it's a mile down there, you know, it's easy. I think that my question here is, where is the place? Where is the gathering place? Where is the place when people say, oh, the Episcopalians from the Diocese of El Camino Real are right there? Where is that place? Do you have that place? You don't have that place. We need to create that place. Because otherwise it kind of fragments our presence, and I think that is very difficult. So that's the physical part. Of course, the public square is also virtual. It's on blog, it's on Facebook, it is in the media, it's on how we communicate, it's how we use the press, all those pieces. And the public square for the bishop has to be very wise and measured and thoughtful about how she uses those media in order to get the message of the diocese out there and across to people. It can't be something that is another Facebook post, right? I mean, we use it very wisely, judiciously, and being very careful about choosing where we stand and how we stand in a way that reflects our Episcopal tradition, using scripture, using tradition, using reason, making our very concerted statements, because people respect the Episcopal voice when it emerges. And I don't mean just Episcopalians. I mean people look, they listen. So in terms of which issues we choose, where we choose to take a stand, I think one of the things that I really appreciate is when the 6 bishops of California get together and issue a pastoral letter. Oh, heck, that's a good thing. Because everybody notices, right? So that is a vehicle. But where do we in this diocese do the same thing? So I'm answering your question with a question that I've been wondering about.